Thank you very much indeed for that welcome. President, distinguished guests and colleagues, I really am so honoured to be able to join you here today. And I was delighted on behalf of NICE to sign a memorandum of understanding with NECA a short while ago in London. There's so much work that we can do together. And I have to say, I've given keynote presentations in maybe 25 countries. Never before have I been given a flower to wear. Thank you. NICE's, the title of this talk refers to health technology assessment in the United Kingdom. Despite the fact that the UK is such a small country, we don't actually have an HTA process for the whole of the United Kingdom. I'm going to focus on England. Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland do things slightly differently. So I'm really going to be talking about England. And I also want to say the slides that I'm delighted you've all got copies of are quite complicated. I'm not going to go through them all, but they're there for reference, and I hope you find them useful. NICE has been in existence for 15 years. I'm astonished at how much NECA has achieved in 5 years. We've been going 15 years, and the reason we were formed was fundamentally because within England there was a widespread variation in what treatments people were receiving. We call this a thing called postcode prescribing. Postcodes in the UK are like zip codes in the States. I don't know what you have here, but in different geographical areas, different patients were being given different drugs. And clearly this wasn't acceptable. So the government wanted to bring in a methodology that used evidence to make sure that the population got the treatments that they need. And this was also at the time that there was quite a lot more money going into the British National Health Service. I wish it was still like that, but it was a time there was more money and there was a determination to try and improve quality, not just to put the money in and wait to see what happened. And so what was expected of NICE was that it would be the national authoritative source of advice and guidance, and it would look at not just effectiveness, but also cost effectiveness. And it would be independent. I am appointed by the Ministers of Health, I'm appointed by the government, but I am independent, and NICE is independent. And we can say what we want, even if the government doesn't necessarily agree with us. That makes it quite difficult sometimes, but it's really very important that we're seen as independent. So a brief history of NICE. When we started off, our main role was in technology appraisals and in clinical guidelines. We then moved into interventional procedures and the important area of implementation. There's no point in producing good guidelines and good technology appraisals if people don't use them. So we had to start to look into how we could encourage the uptake of our work. We next moved into public health and produce a lot of work now in the public health arena around topics like obesity and smoking and alcohol and all the similar topics that you're facing here in Korea. We then moved into diagnostics, our MedTech program, and developed a search engine called NHS Evidence, which is now called NICE Evidence, which looks like Google, but gives researchers and others evidence that's been sorted by its quality. We then took over the prescribing centre in the United Kingdom, and finally in 2013, we took on social care guidelines, which means, for instance, the care of elderly people with Alzheimer's disease, not just the drugs they receive, but the social care that they receive, and also sort of the highly specialised technologies. So it's an extraordinarily broad remit now. But across all of these, our remit is the same. We're there to produce guidance, to produce standards and metrics by which quality can be measured in healthcare, and provide information. And so our portfolio now looks like this. It's very, very broad. And the breadth of NICE, all the way from the molecule through to the social care, is probably the reason that I was appointed as chairman. My background, as you've been told, was as a family physician. And indeed, I've only been with NICE for just less than a year. So the world of health technology, appraisals and so on, is still very new to me. But our breadth is really quite important, and I think it becomes important in every country that uses, is struggling with the problems of how to deliver healthcare. And again, across all the methodologies, we do very much the same. We look at the evidence, we produce a document or our initial assessment. That goes out for consultation publicly. We then publish, we get feedback, we update and so on. We're constantly reviewing all our products. And as I will show you shortly, the number of products that we produce now is simply massive. And the way NICE is organized has all these different divisions. And I won't go through these all, but the health technology assessment is fundamentally carried out by the first one on that list, the Centre for Health Technology Evaluation. Now, as I say, I'm going to focus on HTA, but whatever the area, we keep focusing on these three areas: clinical practice and social care, public health, and health technologies. And we're trying increasingly to link all these. Indeed, in the guidance we produce, we used to say that some of it was for health care, some of it was public health, some of it was social care. We've now stopped labeling them differently. They're all just simply NICE guidance. And we use the same principles in everything that we do, and scientific rigor is clearly really important. Transparency, I'll say more about this, but the vital part of NICE's work is that almost everything we do is done in public. When I chair the board meetings of NICE, we hold these in public in different places around the UK. I chaired one of our board meetings only last week in a town called Exeter down in the west of England. Around about 90 members of the public came to watch the board meeting, to ask questions. They can't take part in the debate, but they can challenge us afterwards and ask questions. And this feels really important. And in all our committees, we also have members of the public are able to attend, and indeed journalists and others. And that very much keeps you awake and on your toes. So that openness is really very important, as is patient involvement. Again, almost every committee that we have has patients on it. Sometimes these are patients with the condition that we're discussing, sometimes they're patients just representing the public. But again, we feel that is really important. So this is our products over the last many years. You can see we started off initially, the blue column there is our health technology appraisals, and if you look across at the bottom, we've continued to produce these, but every year more and more products get added on. So it is an absolutely massive list of products that we produce now. We realize that clinicians and indeed patients and policymakers probably get confused by the amount of work we produce, and now on our website we've tried to tie everything together in a very simple algorithm. So if any given topic, say breast cancer or whatever, you'll find a simple flow diagram in which you can find absolutely everything we've done around that topic. We try and make that simple, and it would be worth looking at the NICE website. Again, in our work, I've already said we involve users and professionals, but we're also obviously linked with politicians. It's very important that politicians, whilst maintaining our independence, we understand the political reality, the public, the media, and we work very, very closely with academic organizations. And when we're trying to look at what value means, we look at it from these different perspectives. The various stakeholders we work with, the outcomes that this is going to deliver for patients, And then that really important one, the impact on the system. In any healthcare system, you can only spend money once. Once you've spent it, you've spent it. And if you choose to spend money on one product, on one drug, it means it isn't available to spend on something else. And that is why using evidence to demonstrate value is so critically important, whichever country you're in. I'm very aware that, for instance, in the UK, primary care is very, very strong. There's a lot, around about 90% of healthcare is delivered by family physicians. But if you put lots and lots of money into very expensive cancer drugs, it means there's less money to give to prevention, to preventing diseases, to public health matters. And that's a really difficult tension, because there's always the pressure on the glamorous, the expensive, but actually you can often get better benefit from some of the cheaper and more public health focused preventative issues. The part of NICE that I've said deals with technology appraisals is the Centre for Health Technology Evaluation. And this again is the list of the different pieces of work that it's involved in. And we've recently become responsible, as it says at the bottom here, for the highly specialized technologies. Things like orphan drugs, drugs for very rare conditions. And I think one of the big challenges that is facing everyone in healthcare is that the more we understand the new genomics, the more we understand genetics, the more we understand the chemistry of disease, we're going to discover that maybe, whereas at the moment we look at a population of 100,000 people and think they have one condition, it may turn out, the more we understand, that there's maybe 1,000 populations of people of which there's 100 with a given particular genetic modification or variation. So that's going to make it extremely difficult. When we're looking at the use of drugs, where at the moment the use of statins, for instance, in preventing heart disease, we know that you have to give around about 100 people statins for a year to save one life, to get one benefit. We just don't know which one it is. In the future, the more we understand the genetics, we may be able to identify that person. What happens to the cost of that drug? Do you have to increase the cost of the drug by 100-fold if you only need to give it to one person? Does that then work? So there's some really interesting tensions that I think we're all going to face. So the specific role of health technology assessment, as you all know, is this particular question, asking how effective is a new drug compared with existing treatments in routine clinical practice? Is there a real, genuine benefit for using a new product? And the incredible expense of new products is a real challenge, again, for all of us. But we have to look at this extra benefit that the new product may or may not bring. And the simple fact that a drug is new doesn't necessarily, of course, mean that it's better, however much the advertising might try and tell us that. So when we publish our products, we publish them, we only publish on the internet now as PDF files or as downloadable files. We don't print anything, partly because of environmental issues and partly because everything needs updating so often. This is the logical way of doing it. But when we do any review of any topic, we not only publish the clinical and the economic evidence which is behind the recommendations that we make, but also the funding impact on the healthcare system. And again, there's always the opportunity for people to challenge our decisions, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. So the sort of technologies we look at are very much listed here, and the main ones are drugs, obviously. Sometimes we're also looking at medical devices and also diagnostics and some procedures, but it's quite a broad range. And if you look at the technology appraisal topics that we've looked at to date, you'll see that cancer takes up the vast, vast majority of these. That big red swathe on the right-hand side there is cancer. And I guess that's because that's where most of the new and very expensive products are being produced. I often say that there's nothing special about cancer. Every disease is as serious as every other disease if you're the one suffering from it. I find that many healthcare systems tend to give cancer a priority, and this is often because of the politics of it. I know in England, our politicians are always talking about the war on cancer. But if you die from diabetes or motor neurone disease or any other condition, it's just as serious. So again, we have a real responsibility to make sure that we don't just focus on cancer. But you'll see it's a very broad selection of topics there. So when we're carrying out an appraisal, we involve all the different groups and initially ask an independent academic group, usually based in a university, to carry out a review and to develop an economic model to try and give us the evidence we require. The manufacturers will provide us with what they believe are the required information about their products, and again we'll look at that in full detail, and we are now insisting that we get all the information that we can about a drug. There's been a real problem internationally, as I'm sure you're all aware, of pharmaceutical companies not releasing all the information about their products. And if you only ever publish trials that show results are positive, then it's hardly surprising if that sends the balance in the wrong direction. So we are insisting now that we get all the published information, and there's an increasing pressure to ensure that all trials are published. So this is carried out by this independent academic group. They report to our appraisal committee, and they also come to the committee meetings to be cross-examined. Within NICE, our appraisals team is quite large. This is how it's made up, and it's based in the cities of London and Manchester. And the appraisal committees, which look at all our technology assessments, are large. There are 34 on the 4 appraisal committees we have, and they're drawn from primary care. We feel it's really, really important to have frontline family physicians involved in these assessments, secondary care specialists, representatives from the medical royal colleges, which are the organisations that are there to promote quality in different specialties, patient groups, health economists, managers from within the health service, public health doctors, the people from healthcare industries, and biostatisticians. So again, a very broad group of people looking at all the evidence. The documentation that they receive before any given meeting is huge. The papers sometimes are this thick. And they get all the information 2 weeks before a meeting and work through that so that they're in a good position in the meeting to be able to discuss it. We also make it absolutely clear that any member of the committee who has a conflict of interest, who has been paid by a company whose drug is being looked at, for instance, cannot take part in any vote, maybe not even take part in the discussion. It depends how serious the conflict is. Again, we have to be very strict. NICE has a great reputation around the world, and part of that is because we can be trusted. And it's important that we have to keep an eye on conflicts of interest. And so this rather complex diagram just shows you all the different phases we go through, starting with horizon scanning, then selecting the topics. Everything we look at we are asked to look at by the Department of Health. That's what DH stands for, the Department of Health. So it will be them who say, this drug is looking promising or expensive or whatever, we want you to look at it. And then it goes through this long and complex process before the appraisal actually begins. Within an appraisal, As I've said, we get the evidence, we get the feedback from these independent committees that have the independent groups who've looked at all the work. We have a first meeting where there is a full discussion of what the evidence is, of what the manufacturers say about the drugs. The manufacturers will be present at the meeting, they can be cross-examined. The second part of the meeting, where the final decision is made, is held in private. And then we publish our views on this particular product for consultation. And we get feedback, and then there is a second meeting where all the comments and feedback that we've had will be taken on board, and finally it'll be published, our final recommendation. There are two main types of appraisal we use: the single technologies, which are particularly a new drug with a single indication, but we also have this process called multiple technology appraisals, which brings together maybe a class of drugs to try and look at what the impact of those are. I don't think I'll bother with that one. And as I've said, the committee meetings are held in public. It means that members of the public, often people or relatives of people with conditions, come and sit in the meeting. So if we're discussing, for instance, a drug for prostate cancer, there may be family relatives of patients with prostate cancer sitting in the audience listening to the discussion. It can be very difficult because they are desperate for us to say yes to any new drug, whereas we have a responsibility across the whole of the system. But they can be there throughout, and as I said earlier, so can journalists, representatives of pharmaceutical industries, and so on. When we've published, there can be an appeal to our process, but only an appeal as to have we done it unfairly? Is the decision perverse? In other words, was a decision made that didn't follow the evidence? And have we extended our powers? And again, if there is an appeal, that too is held in public. So again, a very, very open and transparent process. And over the last 12, 13 years, the percentage of appraisals that we've published, which have led to an appeal, is shown here. And I'm delighted to see the way the graph has gone down and down and down. That now very few, around about 10%, will trigger an appeal. It doesn't mean that everybody, particularly, it doesn't mean the pharmaceutical industry is always happy with this, but they recognize that the process has been gone through fairly. And of course, the way we make our judgments is very straightforward as compared to health technology assessments around the world. What we want to do is see how well that drug works, how justified are the costs. This absolutely recognizes there are limited money that we can spend on these things, and I've already said the opportunity cost. But it does mean there is a fair process across this. And of course, when we're making the final decision, we have to work out which of these boxes to put things in. So if something's less effective and more costly, well, of course you don't want to say yes to it. If it's more effective and less costly, of course you'll say yes to it. The difficulty comes in these other two boxes, where it's less effective and less costly, or more effective and more costly. And the reason that we have committees doing all this is because they have to make a judgment. And I encourage our committees all the time to recognize they are there on behalf of the British public to say, is this a good use of money? If this was simple, we could give it to a computer. We could say, just work out what the qualities are and what yes is and what no is. But you have to make a judgment. And that's why we need people to do this. We publish very clearly what the rules are. Again, this is all on our website, and we've recently updated so everybody understands exactly how we go through our methodologies. Decisions are made around the quality adjusted life year, the QALY concept that I'm sure many, if not all of you, know about. I'm constantly being challenged that is there a better way of looking at the benefits of different therapies? For maybe, I just haven't found it yet, but we'll always be. And we also, about 2 or 3 years ago, we were encouraged by the government to give greater priority to treatments that made a difference to people who were likely to die soon. So if there's a condition where the average life expectancy is less than 24 months, and there was a treatment that could give another 3 months of life, we could give that a little bit extra priority. So whilst we normally work at an NICEA, a cost effectiveness ratio of between 20 and 30,000 pounds per QALY, if it's end of life, we can allow more, and recently we've been encouraged by the government to look at other reasons that we might be able to increase this. You can argue a lot about whether it is a good use of public money to get this little bit of extra life for people who are going to die soon. We could debate that, I'm sure, for an entire day. But it's very, very important to the British public. They see that as something that should be supported. And then there's the whole question of innovation. To what extent is the new product something that we should encourage because it's bringing something new to the healthcare system? And again, we can take a certain amount of notice of this when working out whether we think something's a good value for money. Here you will see down the side, the left-hand scale are the different NICEA costs for the different products we've looked at, and the blue blobs are generally the things we've said yes to, and the red blobs are the things we've not said yes to, and then there's some greeny triangle things that you can possibly just about see, which are things where we said yes under the end-of-life criteria. But you can see sometimes we've been asked to look at products which had an NICEA of nearly £150,000 a year. They've got to be very, 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 very special drugs for us to take that on board. So what do we say? Well, generally we say yes. Most of the time, 80% of the time, we say yes, that this new product is worthwhile. 20% we say no or needs more research. Quite often now, when we say no, the manufacturers, and we say no, this drug is just too expensive, it does not justify the extra cost. The manufacturers and the government then get into a negotiation for a patient access scheme, which is a scheme whereby a discount can be applied. And if a discount is applied, we can then look at it again, and it may then be that we'll say yes. But NICE doesn't get involved in the negotiation on cost. That's done separately. And quite a lot of, in fact, a large number of the drugs we look at now, and particularly cancer drugs, are coming under this patient access scheme. Around about 25% of the drugs we look at are now discounted to get a yes from NICE. We try and work very closely with the pharmaceutical and life science industries so that they understand what we want from them. We run this scientific advice program where they can come along and when they're in the trial, designing trials, designing how they're going to develop products, they can know the best way to provide the evidence that NICE needs. And this has proved very popular with the pharmaceutical industry, who whilst they I suspect, wish we didn't exist at all, if we do exist, they respect us and want to work with us. And we do charge a fee for that. Now, I don't want you to look at this, but actually the law in the UK was changed as from April 2013 to give NICE's decisions a lot of legal clout. When we say yes, patients have a right to receive the drugs that we've said yes to if their clinician says that that's what they need. So the local funders, local hospitals and so on, can't say that's too expensive, we're not going to do it, if NICE has said yes. And we have a thing called the NHS Constitution, which is the rights of our patients to what care they receive from the health service. And within the Constitution, it says you have the right to drugs and treatments that have been recommended by NICE for use in the NHS. So this carries, it does mean if a drug is approved in the UK, there is legal benefits that come with that. We've been working with our Department of Business to try and encourage innovation and innovation, and we've also developed a collaborative with the pharmaceutical industry, with academics and with hospitals and others to try and improve the uptake of our guidance. This is called the NICE Implementation Collaborative. And indeed, we've published a scorecard so that hospitals can demonstrate on their websites that they are following the advice that we've given them. So what do people think of NICE? Well, when we started, we did back in 1999, right at the beginning, there was a public survey. Government thought we were a good thing. Health professionals thought we were a good thing. The industry thought we were a terrible thing. The public didn't really have a clue what we were. And academics, of course, were curious, aren't they always? That's what their job is. And we've faced so much publicity. Newspapers in UK for a long time were constantly attacking NICE, saying it's disgraceful that money isn't being made available for, in this case, kidney cancer drugs, without taking on board what I said earlier, that if you spend it, £35,000 on one patient's kidney cancer, that's £35,000 you can't spend on children with disabilities or people with learning disabilities or whatever. My favourite headline, I think, was this one from the Mail: a Stalinist NHS quango, and British cancer victims denied drugs available in Europe. I mean, we just have to live with this. But in fact, as I've said, we tend to say yes the vast majority of the time. Overall, the things that we say yes to are a real benefit to patients. A lot of drug pricing remains a mystery to many of us. Why some drugs are so expensive, I would love to understand more about and understand the justification. But we've, as I say, 82% of the advice that we publish is positive. And last year, or earlier this year, we did another public perception, and I'm delighted to say that the industry is now still a bit skeptical, but some of the industry is actually, a lot of pharmaceutical company chairmen that I meet are more worried if NICE doesn't look at their product than if we do, because they realise that if we say yes, it really does matter to them. But on the whole, most of industry, most health professionals, most patient groups and so on are now much more positive about NICE. And I think that comes from the fact that whilst people might not like some of the decisions, or they wish there was infinite amount of money available, they can see that we do it transparently, they can see that we do it for the patients of our country. And so all of us involved in HTA around the world are struggling with exactly the same matters. But it's really good that we can learn from each other, and that's why I'm so delighted to been able to join you today. Thank you so much.